Transmitter device activated. Coordinates set for Earth 2.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Earth 2 podcast, your weekly exploration of the DC Comics multiverse, excuse me, and the legacy of their Golden Age characters to the Silver and Bronze Ages of comics. I'm Peter Watson, and I've not had much sleep lately.
I'm David Steele. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. We should have popped some Pro Plus or tanned some Red Bull before we started this one, listeners? No, welcome back. Thank you for joining us. All that torturous introduction might alert you to the fact that this week we're reading another issue of the 70s Sandman. This week it is issue 3, published on the 27th of March 1975, which I think, I always get it one day out. I think this was published on the occasion of my parents' 7th wedding anniversary.
Oh well, there we are.
So, what did you get for your 7th wedding anniversary?
A copy of the Sandman issue 3.
Interesting. Interesting. So listeners, if you know anyone who's got married in the last handful of years and their 7th anniversary is fast approaching and you want to think of something to get them, you can get them a copy of issue 3, of which Peter is now about to tell us about which of the cover.
Indeed, yes. The line of DC superstars enter the incredible dream world of the Sandman, Master of Nightmares, is the banner at the top, 25 cents, number 3. Cover dated July, it says here. Approved by the Comics Code Authority.
Thank goodness for that.
Now that all that's out the way, let's get to the main image of the cover. There's a giant Jack Kirby button in the corner.
Yes.
Which means this is a quality cover.
I think this cover might have been drawn by Jack Kirby.
Indeed it is!
If only there was some way of telling. Anyway, yes.
Yeah, the Jack Kirby button is actually, I think it's bigger than the DC button at the top. It's certainly...
Hang on, I'm going to try use a very scientific way of measuring this.
If not, it's
they're about the
same.
Yeah,
about the same. Okay.
We need another button in the bottom right-hand corner for symmetry.
We do.
We also need to get on with it.
We should do, yes. We're in a young girl's bedroom. She's asleep in her bed, and climbing in the window is a giant brown gorilla. But he's not just any kind of gorilla. No, he appears to have some sort of mechanical apparatus. Is that replacing his brain on top of his brain?
It's very General Electric, isn't it?
It is very General Electric, yes. You can tell that Kirby's all over this. But fortunately, in a cloud of smoke, is she dreaming him? Coming to her rescue is the Sandman, fists raised, ready to tackle this behemoth.
Beautiful detailing. And this cover, I think it's fair to say, because we've had a little debate between us, we think this is the one that's being homaged on the cover of Infinity Incorporated issue 49, which obviously came out long after Crisis on Infinite Earths. And I'll post this cover this week on the socials so you can have a look. Although there are elements of issue 1, I suppose, as well, looking at the cover of issue 49. Anyway, it's the one that closest resembles, we think, issue 49, issue 3, issue 49, because it involves a young lady with Sandman standing over her and someone else bursting in at the left-hand side. Of course, much was done with the Sandman, etc. in Infinity Inc., but that falls after our period of remit, as it were. So
yes.
we might talk about that in the future. We might not.
In our Crisis Hangover episodes, yes.
Possibly. Might encourage you to read Infinity Inc. and, of course, Neil Gaiman's Sandman if you're so inclined. As we've said in the past, stuff was done with some of these characters in those pages, but, that's not going to impact terribly much on what we're going to be talking about because it's in another continuity and it's after the Crisis, blah, 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 blah. So, yes, Infinity Inc. 49, look for it wherever you receive your podcast socials. So, without any further ado, shall we leap in?
Absolutely, yes.
We begin with a caption.
Somewhere between heaven and earth, there is a place where dreams are born and monitored. This is the domain of a legendary figure, eternal and immortal, who shares with man and beast all the secrets of the ages. He is the Sandman in The Brain That Blacked Out the Bronx.
And we have an opening image here, which is not quite a splash image, but it does the job of a splash image. We see the Sandman with a gorilla, sort of more grey than the ones on the cover. In fact, 2 gorillas squaring off, surrounding him with these electronic implants in their head. And what looks like a long, squidgy red and pink thing, which we now realise, because it's got a caption on it that says the brain that blacked out the Bronx, is a brain. And it seems to be radiating waves of energy. In the background, we can see a city landscape, tall skyscrapers and smaller buildings, and they all seem to, well, obviously, they've been blacked out. This must be the Bronx. And the Sandman is exclaiming, "Great Scott! The city's in complete darkness. What's happened to all the electrical power?" And the brain replies,
I ate it for lunch, Sandman, which is exactly what my zombie gorillas are going to do to you.
Oh, yes. Here we go. It's good stuff, this. I'm so glad we decided to do this series. The caption then tells us...
Scripts Michael Fleischer, art Ernie Chan and Mike Royer, editor Joe Orlando.
Brilliant. We jump into the story then.
Somewhere amidst the craggy mountains of Eastern Europe, local peasants descend on the castle stronghold of a tyrant who has long held them in a grip of icy fear.
Yes, it's Hammer horror territory, listeners. Let's be honest, this is really probably should be set a couple of 100 years ago because people don't look like this in Europe, in Eastern Europe especially. There's a whole crowd of people, various ages and shapes and sizes and looks, and a few of them are carrying burning wooden torches, approaching a tall castle. An old man quite near the camera exclaims,
"Burn the castle! Kill the count!"
A younger looking fellow, very broad shoulders and broad foreheaded, in a nice blouson yellow shirt, who's bearing a torch, he yells, "Destroy his fearsome zombie gorillas!" And a very small, seedy looking chap with a moustache and a sort of blue cap on his head can be heard saying,
"Put an end to the gruesome experiments that offend both God and men."
We all up to speed on that then? Zombie gorillas, the count, gruesome experiments. Interesting.
Meanwhile, inside the castle...
Yes, what a sight. Beautifully rendered. Fancy stained glass windows and tall pillars and wooden doors and stone steps. And we see a very dark Dracula-style figure in a dark blue suit and a purple cape cloak which surrounds his nice frilly white shirt, satanic-looking dark eyebrows, swept back dark hair which curls up into little points. He's wrapping his cloak around him. But further than that, he's surrounded by no less than 4 of the gorillas that we've seen with the cybernetic electronic head implants. The first gorilla nearest the window is saying,
"The peasants are attacking in force, master."
And this prompts the count to say,
"I must have time to reach my lab. Hold them off as long as you can."
One of the other gorillas then says, "You gave us life, master. Happily would we perish to keep you from harm."
As the angry peasants swarm into the castle and the shrieks and groans of man battling beast echo through the ancient musty halls, the tyrannical count makes his way to a barred and padlocked door.
He certainly does, and as he does so, he thinks,
"All is lost, but they must not overtake me until I have done what I must do." Meanwhile,
we're outside with a few of the peasants. There's a big, solid, chunky lad wearing green and brown, green waistcoat, tunic thing over brown sleeves, bearing a big stick, and he's a couple of pals. One guy behind him wearing looks like a chef's hat to me. He's dressed all in orange and white, and he's carrying a large, sharp fork. Blonde chap yells,
"Search every nook and cranny, my brothers. The fiend must not escape."
And his pal with the hat and the fork says, "We'll find the villain and hang him from one of his very own trees." Managed to break into the castle. See a large door opening, and they spot the count, who's grasping a glass flask in his right hand. The blonde peasant yells,
"There he is! Seize him! Quickly! He's trying to drink something from that vial!"
"Get it away from him, somebody! He's trying to cheat the hangman!" The count suddenly pitches forward, dropping the glass vial, saying,
"Too late, peasant filth. I have already... He drops, and one of the peasants says, "We're too late. He's already taken to poison."
Chap with the fork, and who looks actually very much like Joaquin Phoenix in this panel. Chap with the fork and the hat leans down to examine him, saying, "He's dead. He took the coward's way out."
"All right, so he's beaten the hangman, but we've beaten him. His evil tyranny is over,"
says the big blonde lad. There's a slow dissolve.
In the days that follow, the villagers devote all their energies to a joyous celebration of their newly won freedom. And so no one pays much attention when 2 cloak-enshrouded relatives come to claim the dead count's body.
Yes, we can see them all celebrating with flagons of ale round a big table in the background. And the blonde peasant who we met earlier seems to be supervising the 2 monk-type figures, 2 bald, thickly set men who are lifting the count's coffin into the back of a large hearse. The chap is saying,
"We never knew the count had any relatives."
And the monk-style figure replies, "We've come from far away, and we are grateful that you are making it possible for us to lay the count to rest in our family burial plot."
But moments later, as the hearse bearing the count's body speeds serenely through the autumn countryside...
Yes, we're inside the hearse. We can see the driver through the little window, and we can see that the count's casket has been opened, and that the 2 people who lifted him in have taken off their faces. They weren't faces at all, they were masks. They're 2 cybernetic gorillas. The first one says,
"We have come in time. There is still no tissue damage."
"Quickly then, place him inside the electrostatic thermo cylinder so that he'll not deteriorate during the long journey ahead."
Soon?
Yes, we see a large ocean liner pulling into port, a couple of seagulls kicking about, and we hear the voices of 2 of the cybernetic gorilla guys. The first one says,
"Before long we will be in America. Professor Runthaven awaits us there."
"The master was wise to plan all this. before the end came.
After 8 days at sea, the ship finally docks in New York Harbor, and the strange cylinder containing the corpse of the evil Count is transferred to a truck and carried over bumpy back roads to a hidden farmhouse laboratory.
Hidden Farmhouse Laboratory, there's a band name there, listeners. Yes, we see the casket being lowered off the ship in the net onto the prongs of a forklift truck, supervised by the two mask-wearing cybernetic gorilla lads. And then the two cybernetic gorilla lads, having taken off their masks, carrying the casket down a little wooden staircase into the aforementioned hidden farmhouse basement laboratory. As they bring it in, they're being observed by an older gentleman with white hair wearing a lab coat and wire-framed glasses. We can see behind him a table, mechanical equipment, lights overhead and stuff. And he points to the gorillas and says, "Hurry! Put him on that table. We do not have much time."
All night long, Professor Rundhaven labours in the performance of a weird surgical operation. And finally, with the first pale light of dawn, comes...
Success! My colleagues laughed at me. They said a brain removal such as this one was impossible, but look, I have done it! I am a genius! We see the professor celebrating because mounted in front of him on top of a stool by the looks of things is a large brain and an even larger jar. Wires and electrodes and stuff connected to it and plugged into some of the other equipment. We see a little speaker on the outside of this giant glass container, and a voice comes from it agreeing with the professor, affirming him and saying,
"Yes, Professor, you are a genius. Only you could have transplanted my brain into this tank. Only you could have given me a voice and provided me with other, even more impressive powers. With them, I shall rule the universe."
"Ah, yes, I know, Count, I know. And then the whole world shall marvel at my achievements."
"Alas, Professor, your great achievement must go unsung. I cannot let you live to tell what has transpired here."
The professor looks a little alarmed at this point. He almost looks as though he's starting to shake when he says, "Cannot let me? No, Count, don't, please." But then, arcing from the brain jar, the professor is then struck with a bolt of electricity. There's a massive zzz sound effect and he screams, "Yeah!" His glasses go flying, his body distorts, he falls to the ground. The brain says,
"Professor Rundhaven did all he could for me, my loyal gorillas. But now, if I'm to leave my tank prison and accumulate even more power, I must have the scientific formulas of the American scientist Ralph Irvin."
There's another great shot of the poor professor lying dead with his eyes wide, very scary. One of the gorillas says,
"We will steal them for you, Master."
"No, my pets. With the aid of my vastly heightened mental powers, I can steal them myself."
That evening in the suburban home of famed brainwave scientist Dr. Ralph Irvin...
Yes, we see Dr. Ralph and his family sat in their very lush apartment, books piled on the table, roaring fire on a fancy marble fireplace. Dr. Ralph Irvin's an older man, going grey at the temples, swept-back dark hair, thick black moustache, thick dark frame glasses, his wife, old-looking woman, rusty-coloured hair, and their daughter, Susie, quite a small blonde girl, wearing very fancy green pyjamas. She's about to climb the wooden hills to Bedfordshire. She says,
"Good night, Mum. Night, Dad."
"Good night, honey. You go have yourself some pleasant dreams here," says the doc. And as Susie departs, he then says, "Good night, honey. You go have yourself some pleasant dreams here. I think I'll turn in myself soon as I finish looking at these latest notes of mine on psychokinetic brainwave abstractions." Very exciting stuff. He's got a big sheaf of papers in his hand, and his wife looks on fondly and says, "Oh, it just sounds fascinating, dear."
Moments later, Susie climbs into her bed and falls fast asleep.
Yep, we see Susie out for the count.
But her dreams are anything but pleasant.
Yes. As Susie dozes, we see an image of the brain of the Count, surrounded by radiating waves of blue and green and yellow energy. It's a suggestion this is what she's dreaming. The brain is saying,
"Listen to me, Susie. I am your friend. The sound of my voice is irresistible to you."
And a zoned out Susie replies,
"Yes, you are my friend."
The brain continues,
"By now your parents are asleep. Without awakening, you will rise from your bed and steal your father's papers on cerebrostatic power absorption. Do you understand?"
"Yes, I understand." Meanwhile, in the Sandman's dream dome...
Things are kicking off. There's lots of ding-ding-dings going off as the Sandman looks at his screens and his equipment, and he can see Susie asleep with the brain hovering over her. Brute and Glob in their glass canisters behind him. Brute seems to be wearing studded wristbands and underpants, which I don't think he wore previously. Maybe he's been down at the Blue Oyster for an evening or something. But anyway, Sandman is taking all this in and he's saying, "The emergency alarm! Someone or something from the world of reality is attempting to invade a nightmare.
Can't you adjust the monitor to get the problem in clearer perspective, Sandman?
That's just what I'm doing, Glob. Great Scott! Look at that! We get a clearer image of the brain hovering above Susie.
Well, that's a pretty poor excuse for a nightmare, if you ask me.
Well, that's not the point, Brute. That brain, or whatever it is, has managed to invade one of Susie Irvin's nightmare channels, and it's trying to hypnotise her into betraying some of her father's valuable scientific secrets.
Then let us out. We'll give that ugly a shell-jacking he'll never forget.
Never Forget, of course, being the 1995 number one by everyone's favourite Mancunian boy band, Take That. Sandman continues, No, Brute, this kind of problem is not in your jurisdiction. I'm going to handle this in person.
Faster than the speed of thought, the Sandman catapults himself into little Susie's nightmare.
We get that now traditional image of the Sandman flying through the dreamscape on his way to the rescue. Might try and fit out in the socials, might not. He's arrived in the dreamscape. Susie's standing in her pyjamas and her slippers amongst a rocky pink landscape with a weird blue sky with various little planets and stars floating around. The brain is hovering in front of Susie, continuing to give her its instructions.
Now remember, Susie, you will do as I say. You will...
But he's interrupted as Sandman flies in saying, Get away from that child, you disgusting fiend!
I don't know how you got here, you costume circus freak, but I'll teach you not to trifle with my awesome power. You are in my power, Susie. Jump off that cliff.
Yes, jump.
What? Exclaims the Sandman as he moves forward.
Powerless to resist the commands of the evil brain, Susie leaps into space, only to be snatched from the jaws of death by the Sandman.
That was close. As she falls, there's a scream from Susie. But then Sandman catches up with her in time to arrest her fall with his arms. We're then back in the real world as Susie wakes up with a scream. The parents rush in with her mother saying, Susie, darling, what's the matter, dear? What's happening?
Mommy, Daddy, it was horrible. This floating brain hypnotized me and made me jump off a cliff. But then a flying man came and...
Now, honey, says Dr. Irvin. Calm down. You were just having a nightmare, that's all.
But, Dad, the brain wanted me to steal your research papers.
Haha, don't worry, sweetheart. My papers are safely filed away in my den. That ugly old brain of yours won't get near them, I promise. Now, you go back to sleep, okay?
Meanwhile...
Yes, we cut back to the poor, unfortunate basement laboratory of the late professor. We see the brain in a jar and two of its gorillas. The first gorilla says,
Did you have success, Master?
No, my pets. I almost succeeded, but because of some costumed interloper, I failed. If I am to have the power and mobility I thirst for, I must have those scientific papers. Tomorrow night you will get them for me.
Yes, Master.
And so, late the following night...
Yes, we see two of the gorillas sneaking about outside a suburban house. One of them's opening up the window and he's saying,
Is this the right domicile?
Yes, inside of the papers our master seeks.
But meanwhile, on his giant monitor screen, the Sandman has been keeping the zombie gorillas under close surveillance.
Yes, we see the Sandman using that weird little gun combination microphone that he's been using. And he's watching the gorillas climb into Susie's bedroom on his screen. He speaks into the weird gun microphone combo saying, Sandman calling Susie! Sandman calling Susie! Clear all fantasy channels for a Priority 1 dream transmission. Over.
And so, although she is fast asleep, little Susie experiences the events taking place inside her home in the form of a frightening dream.
Yes, we see Susie out for the count and the gorillas climbing the window. One of the gorillas is, how we see now, has a large wooden club. That doesn't bode well. Chekhov's club. Watch to see what happens in the next few pages.
Chekhov's clubs where menswear played one of their earliest gigs.
Yes, I think they were supported by Shed 7 on that occasion.
While in the Dream Dome...
We're back with the Sandman who's thinking to himself, thought transference completed. Now to hit the awake switch? And then he says into the microphone, Wake up, Susie! Wake up! We then see Susie's dad sitting up in bed, Dr. Irvin sitting up bolt upright because he has heard,
Help! Daddy, help!
He rushes through to Susie's bedroom saying, What is it, honey? What's the matter?
Daddy, I saw them!
What did you see, sweetheart?
Two big gorillas, Daddy, climbing through the window into your den. They've got clubs and...
You go back to sleep now, honey. I'll go chase those big bad gorillas away. I promise. See him closing Susie's bedroom door. So maybe it wasn't Susie's bedroom door they were climbing into. Maybe it was indeed the den. Anyway, Dr. Irvin leaves Susie's room, closing the door, and he thinks to himself, Susie has such an excitingly creative imagination, but sometimes I wish she... But then he is pulled up short as one of the gorillas appears behind him and with a... Wham! Strikes him on the back of the head with that club he was carrying. Quick deploy of Chekhov's club there. And Dr. Irvin goes down, his glasses falling off, hands splaying out in front of him. Oh my goodness. We pass a house advertisement for Johnny West, a big action cowboy, and his horse Thunderbolt, and then his pal Geronimo, and there's Jane West and Sam Cobra and General Custer. So that's obviously
Custom.
best of the West action figures. That's pretty cool. Interesting. We arrive at the top of page 11. Dr. Irvin down on the ground, the gorilla standing over him. The first gorilla says,
Come, we must find the papers the master seeks.
another one, the one who struck him with a club, says,
Yes, he gave us life. We must not fail him.
Finally, after a frantic search,
yes, we see the gorillas going through filing cabinets and through books and jotters and stuff. We can see that one of the paintings on the wall seems to have been disturbed. They're making a right mess. One gorilla, holding some papers that he's found in a filing cabinet, says,
they are here, the papers we seek.
and his pal replies,
The master will be pleased.
An hour later,
yes, they're back in the basement laboratory. Papers we can see dumped on top of a barrel in front of the brain jar. The brain is delighted.
You have done well, my faithful apes. With these formulas and the special scientific equipment you will steal from me tomorrow night, I will be freed from the confinement of this tank. Free to loose my terrible new powers on a trembling, helpless world.
And as the gorillas bow in supplication, one of them says,
we live only to do your bidding, master.
there's a slow dissolve.
And so, the following night,
Yes, we see a large warehouse. We know it's a warehouse because it has warehouse written on it. It's like something out of Crime Traveller. And we see two gorillas creeping away from the warehouse, each of them carrying a crate over their head. One of them reads, Scientific Supplies Fragile. They're observed by an older man, a becapped guard. Oh, we can take a drink because there's a dustbin in front of them. I've just noticed we've not had one of those for a while. The guard who spies them and thinks to himself,
Two gorillas stealing crates of supplies. I've got to call the police, even though they'll think I've gone completely cuckoo.
soon,
and the gorillas are bearing the supply crates into the brain's laboratory. The first gorilla says,
we have returned, master, with everything you need to become more powerful.
Quickly then, you must hook it into my cerebral life support systems at once, for already I can perceive that you have been followed by those who would destroy us.
Yes, master.
The zombie gorillas work swiftly, skillfully, and within minutes,
yes, we can see that they've been connecting some more cables and stuff from the jar to what look like just large light fittings to my eyes, to be honest. They're obviously what was inside the crates. As they make the final couple of connections, one of the gorillas says,
it is done, master. We...
but the gorilla's interrupted from a voice who says,
All right, you lunatics. Up with your hands.
and then we see two policemen have arrived.
Good Lord, Clancy, what's that icky thing in the tank supposed to do? He hasn't got any hands.
Clancy gasps, and then we hear the brain's voice saying,
These are our enemies, my faithful apes. They must be destroyed.
see a couple more policemen are there as well. Our pal who was just speaking says again,
Oh, no, you don't, Tarzan. Destroying cops in this town is strictly against the law. Feed him some hot lead, Clancy.
and with that they all start firing on the zombie gorillas and on the brain case. So there's a blam, blam, blam. One of the gorillas screams. One falls back, one pitches forward. The glass shatters, prompting the brain to say,
My zombie gorillas, you've killed them. For that, you die.
there is a massive sound effect as the brain radiates massive waves of green energy which strike the three policemen, knocking them all out. One of them yells, and they all collapse to the ground. Oh my goodness, the brain has now emerged from the tank and is floating around on its own unbidden. Maybe that's what all the equipment was going to set it up to do. In fact, the brain clarifies that for me here when he speaks in panel 2 of page 13, saying,
My faithful ape servants, dead. But they have fulfilled their basic purpose, to free me from my tank prison so that I may begin to grow in size and accumulate unlimited power.
Thankfully, not all of the cops had made their way into the basement laboratory because we can see one lad who's standing outside looking through the window, watching what's going on, and he thinks to himself, oh my god, I gotta call headquarters, fast!
And so, the following evening, when a weird form appears in the sky over Con Edison's Bronx power plant, the authorities are ready.
Yes, it must be pointed out, of course, that Con Edison's Bronx power plant supported menswear at Southampton Joiners Arms in 1996. The caption continues,
At least, they think they are ready.
yeah, this is a great panel. Hopefully there's room for this in the socials as well. There's a crowd of people who should probably be at home at this time, standing close to electrical pylons. There are dome buildings, tall cylinders with ladders down the side, and what looks like a broadcasting transmission tower, all sorts of fancy buildings. There's a couple of policemen, but above all this, floating in the sky. Huge now, radiating solid gold energy amongst this pink evening sky is the brain of the Count. Good grief. Amongst those watching are a young family. A little blonde boy points up at the brain and says, "Is that the Goodyear blimp, Dad?"
Looks more to me like a flying brain, son.
The police are on the case. There's one who has a radio receiver in his hand and he's saying, "Here it comes. It's heading for the power plant." And the voice over the radio replies,
Good, that's just what we want.
we see the brain, and it is enormous, floating towards the overhead wires near the pylons. And we hear once again the cop over the radio saying,
Soon as that nasty bugger gets near the power plant's roof, we're ready to zap it with 6 million volts of concentrated electricity.
and the cop on the scene replies, "Better get set. It won't be long now."
But in his dream dome, the Sandman views these events with alarm.
Yep, see the Sandman operating equipment and surrounded by screens showing the events taking place at the power plant. We can see the police operating crowd control. We can see the brain floating above the pylons, a closer shot of the brain at the pylon, closer shot of the policeman on his radio. Sandman taking all this in and saying, "Those fools! Don't they realise their attempts to electrocute that brain will only make it more powerful?" This prompts Brute to press against the glass of his container and say,
You're such a party pooper, Sandman. Can't you ever just sit back and watch the fun like any normal person?
"Quiet, Brute. If I can save the world from destruction, it's the least I can do." And with that, Sandman grabs a hold of the handle and launches himself into the reality ejector tube.
Instantaneously, the Sandman is transmitted into the world of reality.
Yeah, we see Sandman dropping down in the vicinity of the power plant. Once again, he's going to have a random encounter with some members of the emergency services on Earth. Take a drink every time the Sandman has a random encounter with some members of the emergency services here on Earth. As he drops to his feet, taking everything in, Sandman thinks to himself, "If only I'm not too late. New York policemen are brave, but they have no experience in dealing with world menaces." He runs up to a couple of cops at the police roadblock, exclaiming, "Please, listen to me. What you're planning, it won't work."
Hey, Bartholomew, who is this clown? A friend of yours?
"I don't know who he is. Doesn't he sort of look like a stewardess from one of those big airlines?" "This is no time for joking," says Sandman. "If you let that brain reach the power plant, he'll..."
Look, Sonny, why don't you just go back to Ringling Brothers and let us police handle the flying brain problem, okay?
Sandman then thinks to himself, "I hate to do this, but this is an emergency." And he's pulled out his little canister of dream dust, which he then opens and sprinkles in the face of the cop closest to him.
Hey, that sand. It's making me sleepy.
One of the other cops exclaims, "Hey, look!" See, in the next panel, the cop that Sandman threw the dust on is down, out for the count on the ground. One of the surviving cops, to use a better way of putting it, exclaims, "That hippie! He threw something at Chris and now he's out colder than a mackerel."
Was it LSD through or what?
"I don't know, but I ain't taking no chances." This cop pulls a pistol, which he points at the Sandman, saying, "Get your hands away from that fancy belt, you weirdo. You're spending the night in a slammer."
And so...
And indeed, we see the Sandman has been thrown into a prison cell. He rattles the bars, saying, "Officer, please, you've got to listen."
Forget it, I've got work to do. And if you want to entertain yourself, try reading a comic book. You sure look like you belong in one.
That was very postmodern, wasn't it, listeners? It's like when in a cop drama when someone says to his pal, "This isn't a TV show, you know." And Alexis Sale made that joke in the 80s, "You don't have to thank me." There's a slow dissolve.
Meanwhile, back at the power plant...
Wow. Yeah, this is amazing. The brain seems almost entangled now with the overhead power cables. The policeman with his radio is looking up at all and saying, "The brain's about to touch down. Get ready to throw that switch." The brain is meanwhile thinking to itself,
Those imbeciles. Wait till they see what their puny electric voltage does to me.
As the ghastly brain descends onto the power plant roof, white-hot flashes of electricity course through its labyrinthine convulsions, sending sparks of radiant power sizzling skyward.
yes, they go sizzling sky with a massive zap. Lots of green radiating energy spreading out all over the place.
And then...
All the cops on the ground watching what's going on. One of them says, "He's getting away. It didn't hurt him at all." And a man who should be at home, safe at this point, standing there, he points to the city. And we see that it's gone completely dark. And he points and says,
And look, the entire Bronx is blacked out. That thing sucked the entire power plant dry.
one policeman, feeling helpless, shines a torch around and says,
All we've got for light are these stupid flashlights.
we pass again. It's the Take a Drink. It's the full page advertisement for the Bible tabloid and the All-Star Comics 3 tabloid. Why are they making such a fuss about the first appearance of the Justice Society? And then we arrive at the top of page 17.
Meanwhile...
We're back in the Sandman's prison cell. He's thinking to himself, "I can't just sit here, not with the entire world in jeopardy. I've got to summon Brudenglob with my hypnosonic whistle." takes his whistle out, and boy does he blow.
Back at the Dream Dome, Brute and Glob are released from their tubes by the whistle's ultrasonic vibes.
Yeah, we see the canisters that keep them in place opening up, and the two nightmare creatures making their way out. Glob says,
Come on, Brute. The Sandman needs us.
Yeah, he would go and get himself busted. What a dummy.
And within 2 shakes of a comet's tail,
yes, Brute and Glob have appeared in the police station, each carrying their large sacks in front of them. The desk sergeant isn't fazed in the slightest when he says,
is there something I can do for you, gentlemen?
There sure is, Twinkle Toes. Get a load of some of these vile things, why don't ya?
Catapulted instantly into a deep sleep by the magic of Glob and Brute, the desk sergeant is tormented by ghastly nightmares.
yeah, emerging from the sacks, we see what looks like giant spiders. And is that a mouse? And is that a giant wiggly worm? And they're all making their way, hopping their way towards the sergeant, who reacts with,
Take them away! Take them away!
Glob hasn't wasted any time. He's made a grab and he says,
I've got his keys, Brute. Let's go.
they rush up to the Sandman's cell, Glob bouncing and twirling the keys around, saying,
Did you whistle for us, Sandman?
Boy, am I glad to see you two. Glob unlocks the cell. As he opens the door, Brute says,
For a guy that's supposed to be eternal and immortal, I think you look positively ridiculous.
that's a bit of a non sequitur, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sandman replies, Your jokes leave me cold, Brute. Quickly, we've got to get out of here.
Within moments,
Yes, this is a great panel, the three of them running along. I wish we had the point of view shot of a normal punter, because they're basically just running along the street. I bet that looks terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Bouncing along, Glob has a large grin on his face, and Sandman is saying, I'm ashamed of you, Brute. You know, you could have put that desk sergeant to sleep without scaring him half to death with violent nightmares.
Oh, you're such a spoil sport, Sandman. It ain't even funny.
You two return to base. I'm going after the brain alone.
Oh, I get it. You don't want those nightmares cramping your superhero style. Come on, Glob. Let's fade.
for hours the Sandman futilely scours the countryside, and finally, as dawn breaks over the city, he finds his quarry at last.
Yeah, it must be some way outside the city because we can see the silhouettes of some tall buildings behind them, but basically it appears to be standing in a large field, a lot of grass around them. The brain is floating in air above. The Sandman is looking up as all the energy radiates out from the brain, and he thinks, oh my gosh, thanks to all that electricity he absorbed, he's gotten gigantic. The brain, well, he says,
That's right, you impudent fool. I can also read your mind. Soon I will be powerful enough to hypnotize entire populations into doing my bidding. Watch, for example, how I can conjure up a fantasy monster to crush the life out of you.
and out of nowhere, we see a creature that's actually very reminiscent to some of the ones that Dr. Spider was creating in the last issue. It's a big, long, wiggly snake with almost like a head of a bird at the top and massive wings, and it's bearing down towards the Sandman, who recoils in horror. Looking at it, he thinks, good grief, even in the dream stream I never saw anything as disgusting as that.
But even as the gruesome monster begins to crush the Sandman in its unctuous coils,
Yeah, we see Sandman being caught and held fast. He yells, ah!
the fearless Dream Master reaches deftly for one of the sand cartridges affixed to his belt, and acts.
Once again, Sandman reaches for his sleepy dream stuff and hurls it in the direction of the weird giant bird snake thing, thinking, fantasy monster or not, this ought to send him straight to dreamland. And then, indeed, we see in panel 3, the bird snake weird scary thing is out for the count on the ground. Sandman, looking up at the brain, says, and now, to take care of you.
Take care of me, eh? With what? That nickel-plated dime-store dog whistle?
The brain laughs because we can see indeed that the Sandman is putting his whistle up to his mouth. The caption for the next panel reads,
But the evil laughter ceases abruptly as the Sandman blows on his hypnosonic whistle, for it is the most powerful weapon of law and justice the world has ever known.
Yep, Sandman blows hard and we see the ultrasonic wave coming out of the whistle, and the caption for the final panel of the story reads,
And as the super shrill ultrasonic vibrations reverberate across the landscape, the malignant brain explodes into nothingness with the fury of 100 H-bombs.
there's a massive BAROOM! And a huge massive explosion goes off, the brain is destroyed, and Sandman stands thoughtfully, considers and thinks, there was no other way. Had he lived, he would have plunged all humanity into abject slavery. And a caption reads,
End.
Next issue on sale during the last week in May.
well, that was a terrible ending, wasn't it?
That was the most abrupt ending of anything. It was ridiculous.
Yes, it almost felt like, it wasn't like the final page of the first issue where they basically, the panels got smaller to fit everything in. That was just like, when Dr. Spider's submarine exploded, at least there was a few panels afterwards when they considered what had been going on. That was...
True.
There was some good stuff there, like the General Electric style gorillas. I mean, obviously they must be dead gorillas that have been reanimated by
because they're zombie
gorillas, yeah.
Gas.
And the floating brain is pretty cool. The scenes of it floating around New York and then Sandman obviously being actually restrained by the emergency forces this time. That hasn't happened so far.
Yeah.
But it was, I think that's probably the weakest so far on balance.
I still loved it.
Oh, it was great.
I loved
It was
every
glorious.
page.
I enjoyed it very much, but the abruptness of the ending, we don't cut back, we don't find out what happens to the doctor and his family, if they're all right. Was he killed by that club? Was he just knocked out? I think the weakest and the most unsatisfying.
It was interesting to see Sandman react to another child in peril and not just Jed.
Yes, that's fair.
So it's not as if he's linked to Jed, which, almost seemed like he was the first two issues.
That's an excellent point.
I don't know if you got the same vibe I got, but this professor who actually had the Count's brain in the jar at the start reminded me very much of Kerensky from the Doctor Who story City of Death.
Sure, I can see that. Yeah.
And that he's doing all this stuff for the Count.
Oh, of course. I didn't even think about that at all.
And of course it ends badly for him.
That's fair. Just a shame there weren't any chickens.
I know, that's true. And of course, Brain of Morbius sprung to mind, the Doctor Who story, because we've got this giant brain in a jar.
That's also true. That I think that occurred to me vaguely, but it just, oh dear, that's terrible. That shows how much Doctor Who is not in the foreground of my brain at the moment. I didn't really think of any of that at all.
Yeah, they are two of my favourite stories, so no wonder this clicked with me.
Sure, that's fair. Disembodied floating brain is a great horror image. I think the scenes of it floating above New York and people pointing at it, that's really effective. I would have liked maybe a couple more sort of, shall we say, Astro City style panels of normal people reacting to them. Yeah, they packed a lot in, given that it kicked off with the the European sort of peasants and all that, and then it went all the way to New York, and because it was a while before Sandman got involved as well properly. That was quite interesting. It was quite wide ranging. I just felt it was just a bit not quite as chewy as the other ones.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I recently watched the first two Hammer Quatermasses.
Right.
And I had flashbacks to that with, the thing happening and the police cordoning off things and public reacting in weird ways.
Yeah, Steve's in the middle of a big Hammer horror movie watch at the moment as we speak. We've been having a few chats about that and his reactions to various things. I know that the other evening he watched Paranoiac for the first time, which is the Hammer, a very loose adaptation of Brat Farah by Josephine Tay, my favourite novel of all time. So we've not yet had the chance to talk about it, but I'm sure we will have by the time this is released. Yeah, I get that. What I like most about these stories is when the real world kind of breaks in a little bit. But the thing is, every time that it's happened so far, it's just been like policemen and firemen. Yeah. There was some army stuff in part one. I mean, what I'd like to see in these is maybe a bit more of the real world. I mean, obviously, we saw a bit more of the real world with Susie and her family and Dr. Irvin and stuff. That was pretty cool. I mean, I'd like to see a bit more of that emphasised just because the Dream World stuff is so out there. Yeah. It's certainly, this one, although I'm saying it's unsatisfying, like issue 2, it's a lot more linear than issue 1. Yes. Which was just like jump
frenetic,
all over the place and had so much weird stuff. None of that felt real. Yeah. Whereas there's that little bit when you see the little group of European generals or whatever and they don't feel like real people at all. Whereas this one, given that we see the family in front of the power station and all that, I guess they must have just lived nearby. Cheap property, I imagine. The more linear sense of it, I think, works in its favour. I think that makes it a little more easy to process.
Yep, I'm with you in that.
Does that seem fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And of course, easy to process because we've said before, this is a great comic for kids. I mean, I think you mentioned the warehouse labelled warehouse. Yes. And of course, the crates are actually labelled scientific supplies fragile. So, get me scientific supplies, says the brain, so they literally get the scientific supplies. Yeah. Because that's all you need to do. It's wonderful. Yes.
Yeah, we don't really get any information on what the scientific supplies actually are. But
just as long as he's got enough scientific supplies, there'll be something. Yes. That's it. It was the 70s.
It was. Hooray.
And I thought the brain actually did seem a bit regretful that his apes had died.
Yes.
Which was interesting, I think. It was a strange kind of almost an emotion from him, apart from his must become stronger and
that's fair.
Rule the world.
That's fair.
It was his Frankenstein's monster, as it were, that he was caring about. Not enough Brit and Glob action for me in this one.
Yeah, and it seems that they've, again, they just rock up for a couple of pages to get him out of trouble. Yeah. You think he must be, if the whistle's so powerful, surely you could use that to vibrate open the lock or something, or...
yeah, you'd think.
I would think.
I love the fact that Brit and Glob carry their vile things in basically pillowcases.
Yeah, I mean, I just described them as sacks, but no, that's probably
they're white, so look, very much like it's just.
I hope they are actually. That makes it. Yeah, I know what you're saying. That's much more ties in with sort of a dream, sort of sleeping type motif, doesn't it?
And again, we mentioned this before. We've talked about Sandman. It's like you can imagine kids playing this in the playground because you've got the whistle. You've got sand, easy things to do, and now pillowcases.
A pillowcase full of nightmare monsters.
Like a rubber spider or something like that,
Yeah.
Again, just easy things you could play. It just really sparks the imagination of youngsters. It's fantastic. I love this so much.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I mean, it's not a difficult read. It rattles along. It's brilliantly paced. The artwork's fine. Artwork's good. I mean, there's some brilliant imagery. Again, I think when we did issue 2, we sort of speculated what it'd be like if this had been drawn by other people.
Yeah.
But I think it works. Is it the next issue that Jack's back?
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see that as well.
My last comment I've got really is the very final panel with the brain exploding into nothingness with the fury of 100 H-bombs just outside New York. Hopefully that's just metaphorical.
Yes. Yes, that's a very fair point.
Or else there wouldn't be much of the Bronx left now.
Yeah, I mean, it's also just a little bit, the fact that he, as I said, that he could have used the whistle to escape from prison. If he get all it takes to stop the brain is just to blow on the whistle and it takes it out. And maybe it's because it's, I don't know, do the ultrasonic vibrations revert across the... No, I think the ending's rotten.
Yeah.
Ending's terrible, really unsatisfying, a bit like, will this do? Type. And the doctor blew up the thing, the end, or something. It stops rather than finishes.
We could literally change the thought balloon on the final panel and have Sandman thinking there was no other way. We ran out of pages.
How many pages? Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the brain decides to create a nightmare monster which lasts for 3 panels. He could quite easily not have the brain create a nightmare monster, and maybe Sandman could have tried to reason with the brain for a couple of panels, a bit of dialogue about, don't you realise what you're doing? You're, I do not care, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And that would have given them, okay, well, in that, you leave me no choice. A bit of dialogue like that might have been better.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I wondered as well. This is a 19-page story, which is really unusual. Because usually it'd be like 20 or 18. Yeah,
it's either 18 or 22 or something, isn't it? Or 21. It's kind of in the middle.
So I wondered if maybe there was a page planned after this and they thought we don't need it.
Don't know.
Could be.
Don't know. Bit abrupt.
Or maybe they were behind and thought we'll just get this out without the final page because we don't need it. Pop another advert in.
Yeah, we'll never know. Unless Michael Fleischer wants to come on and talk to us. So, the contemporary correspondence now, listeners. We jump to issue 6. The Dream Dome. The first letter goes like this. Dear Joe, when I heard that Jack Kirby would not be continuing the Sandman, I did not expect the series to be anything special, but after reading the 2nd and 3rd issue, I can only say bravo. I'm amazed to see Mike attempt the Frankenstein theme and still weave a fascinating story from the dog-eared idea. Well, as for Ernie's pencils, you might almost mistake this book for an early Kirby due to its strikingly dramatic simplicity. That's a compliment, gent. Witness the laboratory and brain bath on page 4, panel 5. Golden Age, simplicity, a refreshing change from the slick look. Then, in contrast, we have Susie's dream done in a manner which reminded me of the psychological dream paintings of De Chirico, whoever that is. I'm sure someone will tell us on a tweet. Humour lifts the story with such scenes as the cops throwing Sandy into the slammer and telling him to read a comic because he looks like he belongs in one. Ha! Then there's Brute and Glob, a lovable pair with their bag of vile things. They lend just the right touch of weird humour to the strip. And as supporting characters, they have real possibilities. What happens if they should refuse Sandman's request in the future out of mischievousness? It's obvious they and Sandman are tight friends, but... The weak point of the story was the abrupt ending. Sandman's dog whistle was too simple. This hypnosonic whistle is a bit too strong a weapon. We agreed. Still, all in all, you have preserved the Kirby flavour in both story and art, and even managed to add something of your own. The strip has a lot of potential for developing into a fantastic journey. Aha, see what you did there? Through the mind. This is its appeal to us oldsters. Yet with the dream format, the kids can relate to it easily as well. And that's from Jeffrey J. Long, Oak Park, Illinois. Another letter from Illinois. Steve, get on a road trip and photograph yourself with all these places in Illinois. Editorial response reads,
We've tried to find more interesting uses for the hypnosonic whistle in recent issues because we discovered the problem of its invincibility around the same thing you did a couple of issues into the series. So look for Sandman depending much more on his wits and other powers in the future. Well, he won't because this is the final issue of this series.
Spoilers. Well, still, there's issue 7 from Comics Cavalcade.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Which we'll probably do Christmas next year, listeners, if we remember. We have something else planned for Christmas this year.
Yes.
The next letter.
Dear Joe, Sandman 3 was pretty good, but still riding the fine line between realism and comedy. The perfect place for old Sandman to be. Michael Fleischer is doing beautifully, but he's not adding much to the character, just echoing the storylines and basics of the Simon and Kirby story. Sandman should visit other realms and fight something other than Earth-made tragedies invading the dream stream. I'm also anxiously awaiting the promised Kirby art. Hopefully by the time this letter crosses your desk, you'll be printing up some of his issues. And that's from Perry Wilson, Sonora, California.
Editorial response to that one reads, not only Kirby, but Kirby and Wood, as you saw this issue, reunited for the first time in 15 years. This is a one-time only treat, gang, so enjoy it while you can. It's almost impossible to fit another combo issue into both artists' busy schedules. That's obviously talking about issue 6, which lies in the future. Sandman issue 4 is not too far away, but listeners, what did you think of issue 3? What did you think of the ending? What did you think of the gorillas? What did you think of the rest of it?
You can write to us and let us know. You can email us at theearth2podcast@gmail.com. Make sure you follow us on social media because we're putting up lots of lovely bonus material for this and indeed every episode. On Facebook and Instagram, we're at the Earth 2 Podcast, and on Twitter, we're at podcast_Earth2, and it is the number 2 for all of our socials.
It certainly is. Listeners, if you're enjoying what we're doing in the show, please go to wherever it is you receive your podcast and give us a positive review. Such things are good for our optics and visibility, etc. Or tell your pals, spread the word. If you're any pals who are reading the Vertigo Sandman back in the 90s, let them know that we're doing these stories because they might dig it. If not, or you could go to our coffee page and buy Peter the price of a beverage, as he spends all his time editing all the times I called the Shadow of the Spectre the other week. He deserves it. Anyway, as usual, check out all our pals' podcasts because they're brilliant. I think that's fair.
It is fair.
Yeah.
And in that, 100 times each bombshell, as it was in the final panel, I've been Peter.
I'm off for a nap. See you next time on
Transmatter Cube activated. Return coordinates set for Earth Prime.
We begin with a caption.
Somewhere. Sorry.
You're only giving yourself work.
I know. I had to clear my throat anyway, so I thought I'd have fun with it.